Lately, I've been thinking about you. Lately, I've been dreaming of you. Lately, I can't get you out of my head. Can't get you out of my head. Yeah, there's something about the ocean that makes me rise up and praise. There's something about the heavens that makes me stand in awe again. There's something about the sunrise reminds me of your faithfulness. There's something about the ocean, and I'm lost in love again. I'll sing until I sense a smile upon your great and loving face, until I know your glory's in this place. Your glory's in this place, yeah. There's something about the ocean that makes me rise up and praise. There's something about the heavens that makes me stand in awe again. There's something about the sunrise reminds me of your faithfulness. There's something about the ocean, and I'm lost in love again. Na 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 na. There's something about the ocean that makes me rise up and praise. There's something about the heavens that makes me stand in awe again. There's something about the sunrise reminds me of your faithfulness. There's something about your presence, and I'm lost in love again.
Hi. Do you need a miracle? Do you need help from God, something that you can't do on your own? Well, the good news for us is God still does miracles. I want to read from John chapter 6, verse 11 to begin this morning. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. So in the first part of John chapter 6, we find the story of Jesus feeding 5,000 men plus an unknown number of women and children with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. The need for the miracle arose because of a tragedy in Jesus' family. The disciples of his cousin John the Baptist had come to Jesus and said to him, "We have bad news. Herod has killed your cousin John." And so when Jesus was given this news, he wanted to go and be by himself. And so he sought out a desolate place, but he was becoming very popular with the people, and they kind of followed him out of town anyway. So his attempt to get away was unsuccessful. He came ashore only to find the people had walked around the lake to find him. some in need of a miracle, others just wanting to see and hear the man that all were talking about. Jesus, even though he was grieving and wanted some time to himself, had compassion on them. Matthew's version of this story tells us that he healed their sick even while in the midst of his grief. The people wouldn't leave because they wanted to listen to Jesus. Because this was a spontaneous meeting, there had been no preparations made for this outdoor event. They were not in a town with a marketplace. They had no facilities, so there was a genuine need for people in this situation. They were so hungry for what Jesus was saying and so interested in having their loved ones brought to Jesus who had been suffering so that Jesus could touch them and they could receive the miracle of healing and deliverance that they needed. The people were willing to go out without the normal comforts. They must have felt the risk was worth it because of what Jesus had done so far. So they find themselves not only having their relatives healed, but they also find themselves listening to Jesus as he's talking on this desolate place on the side of a mountain. And many of the people are in need and they're hungry. And John picks up the story at this point. Jesus goes up to the mountain, he sits down with his disciples, and lifting his eyes, he sees the large crowd of people coming toward him, and he knows he plans to give them a miracle. So beginning with verse 5 of chapter 6, let me just kind of sum up what's happened rather than reading it. He sees the crowd, and he says, where are we going to get bread to feed this many people? Now, he already knows what he's planning on doing, but he's talking to one of his disciples named Philip. And Philip says, if you had 200 denarii, that wouldn't be enough money to buy food for this many people, even if we lived in a place, or we had our meeting in a place where food was readily available. But Andrew, one of the disciples, comes up to Jesus and says, hey, there's a kid here that has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus says, yeah, that'll be enough. Have the people sit down. And so there's a lot of grass in the place. And so, that's when we're told the number of men is about 5,000 people. And that's where I read out earlier in verse 11, where Jesus takes that, thanks God for that, and then distributes the elements or the food to everybody. And they eat. And then they gather up 12 basketfuls of leftovers. It says in verse 14, when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. So the people were in real need. They were hungry because they had not prepared to go on a pilgrimage into the wilderness. There was no way they could meet their need, not in any normal human way. They needed a miracle, and they got a miracle. Fortunately for us, miracles is something that God still does today. You need to know this because at some point in your life, you may need a miracle. And when you are, you want to be prepared to receive the miracle. A miracle is when God intervenes to do something that's not going to occur in the normal course of life. Something that will not come about by normal human knowledge or normal human ability. A miracle is God manifesting a supernatural act that helps us out of our desperate situation. I would prefer not to need a miracle, but at some point in life, all of us may need one or more. God is willing to do the miraculous, but are we prepared to receive the miraculous? We have to look for the miracle. We have to expect a miracle. We have to be open to receiving a miracle. This feeding of the 5,000 was not something that just happened. It was not a random act of Jesus. When he spoke with Philip, he knew what he planned to do. Everyone on that day was willing to receive miracle food. They were hungry. They were in need. Are you prepared for a miracle? Are you expecting a miracle? There are things we can do to prepare for a miracle. The first things we can do is admit we need a miracle. In our culture, we make heroes of people who are self-sufficient and seem to be able to meet their own needs. People are introduced as a self-made man or a self-made woman, and that's to be something that's applauded, and we're supposed to go, ooh, wow, isn't that great? Frank Sinatra sang a song with the phrase, "I did it my way," emphasizes the independence we value in our nation. We idolize those who we think are without need, causing the rest of us to hide our needs because we don't want to appear weak. We want to appear strong and able to handle anything that life throws at us. Well, if that's your attitude, guess what? You're probably not ready to receive a miracle. You're probably not expecting a miracle because you and everybody around you is under the illusion that you can provide everything for yourself. That's the great lie of our culture. We need one another. We need community. We need order. We need God, and we need the miraculous. That attitude doesn't help us prepare to receive a miracle because we convince others that we have no need, or what needs we do have, we can meet by working more or working harder. To receive a miracle, we have to admit we need one. In Matthew 7, verse 7, Jesus instructs us to ask, seek, knock. These are the things we do when we have a need in our life that we know we cannot meet on our own. He goes on to tell us that the Father in heaven will give good things to those who ask. We are being told that if you have a need, admit your need. In Mark chapter 7, verses 24 to 30, we find a story of a Syrophoenician woman who could not help her daughter who was possessed by a demon. She heard that Jesus was going to be nearby, so she went to him for help. But he does something that's very confusing. He rejects her because she's not Jewish. She's a Gentile. She persists because she has a need that needs to be met and she can't do it herself. She humbles herself before Jesus and she says, Jesus, even the dogs eat the crumbs that the children drop on the floor. She receives her miracle because she admitted her need and her inability to meet her own need. What needs do you have right now that you cannot meet on your own? Ask the Father who gives generously. Next, we have to ask ourselves, what do we already have in our hand? God provides us with provides for us in many different ways. Sometimes he creates out of nothing, as he did at the beginning. Other times he works with what already exists, as he did with the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. In verse 9, Andrew found a boy with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and with that, Jesus did the miraculous. So if you need a miracle, assess what you already have. In Exodus chapter 4, Moses is trying quite hard to get out of going back to Egypt as the deliverer. And as the conversation goes back and forth, the Lord proves to Moses that he is God. He asks him, what is in your hand? Moses had his staff in his hand. So that's what God used to do the miraculous, to prove to Moses that he, God, would be with Moses as Moses returned to Egypt. With that staff, Moses used it to bring plagues on the disobedient Egypt. With that staff, Moses parted the Red Sea so they could pass through on dry ground. All miraculous. Elijah was sent to the widow of Zarephath so she could feed him. The problem was she was out of food. She had just a little bit of flour and oil left. She was preparing the last meal so her and her son could eat it and die. And Elijah said, no, before you fix your last meal, fix me the meal, and God will provide for you. And you know what? God provided. The oil and flour lasted for days. God provided supernatural vision because she provided for Elijah before herself out of what she had. That story is found in 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 6 to 8. Elisha, the prophet was approached by a widow of a prophet who had died and leaving his family in debt. So the debtors were coming to take the woman's children. And all she had to her name, at least in the story, was a little oil. So Elisha says, go borrow all the vessels, all the jugs and jars that you can find. And then pour the oil from your container into all those. And she filled every one of those empty ones until they were full. God supernaturally gave debt relief. That's found in 2 Kings 4, 1-7. God can still relieve debt today. He is able to do that. When you prepare for a miracle, God will use or may use what you already have. But if we hold on to it very tight, it doesn't do us any good. So the next step in preparing for a miracle is to give God what you have. The last point was about knowing what you already have. The next step is to give what you have to God, who can do more with it than you can do with it. In chapter 6 of John, the boy has the 5 loaves, the 2 fish, and he could have held on to what he had. After all, it was his, and that was his lunch and dinner. But instead, he offers what he has to Jesus. Jesus took the loaves that were given to him, and with what was given to him, he did a miracle that fed all who were hungry. God can take what little we have and change the world if we will only give it to him. I recently read the story of a young man in England who was struggling through college, and he was down to 8 pence, which in American would be similar to a penny left in his bank account. Literally, he went to church and he put 1 pence in the offering at church. The following week, the Lord spoke to him and told him to go to a bank and go up to a particular teller at the bank. And when he went and had a conversation, he found out that without his knowledge, someone had deposited 800 pounds in his bank account. He gave a penny. That's what he had. And God did a miracle. In giving to God, we're not buying a miracle. Please understand that. This is not some infomercial sales pitch. This is not some formula or some scheme. You cannot buy a miracle, okay? This is not economics. We're not bartering with God. We are simply giving him what we have. God will use what we give him. If we give him our life, he will use that. If we give him our mind, he will use that. If we give him our strength, he will use that. If we give him our insight, he will use that. If we give him our voice, he will use that. So we have to expect God to multiply what we give him. In verses 12 and 13 of chapter 6 of John, it says, "And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, 'Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost.' So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten." 5 loaves and 2 fish now becomes 12 baskets. More food at the end than they began with. So understand this. God is not a scam artist. We do not have to be suspicious toward him or fear he will turn on us. When we ask, seek, or knock, we need to be expecting, looking for the miraculous that God is about to do. The boy with the loaves and fishes had enough for himself to eat well for several days. He was under no pressure to give his food away. He came prepared. Even though he didn't have to give, he did give his food to Jesus. And with his food, he witnessed a supernaturally multiplied supply of food that was able to feed that large crowd. Not only give them something to eat, they were so full they had leftovers. How do we know they're full? Because they collected those baskets. This is not the only time that God supernaturally provided food to the hungry, and he can still do that today. When we give, we need to expect God to multiply what we give. He's already proven to us that he does this. Hattie Mae Wyatt, A 6-year-old girl lived near Grace Baptist Church in Philadelphia. Sunday school was very crowded. The pastor, Russell Conwell, told her one day that they would have a building big enough to allow everyone to attend. And she said, I hope so, because I'm afraid to go there alone. It's so crowded. And he said, when we get the money, we will construct one large enough to get all the children in. 2 years later, in 1886, Hattie Mae died. After the funeral, Hattie's mother gave the minister a little bag that they'd found under her daughter's pillow containing 57 cents in change. She had saved that up. Alongside that was a handwritten note to help build bigger so that more children can go to Sunday school. Boy, those were the days when children went to Sunday school. The minister changed all the money into pennies and offered each one for sale. From those 57 pennies, he received $250 and 54 of the pennies back. The $250 itself was changed into pennies and sold by the newly formed Wyatt Mite Society. In this way, her 57 cents kept on multiplying. 26 years later, in a talk entitled The History of the 57 Cents, the minister explained that the result of the 57-cent donation, a church with membership of over 5,600 people, a hospital where tens of thousands had been treated, 80,000 young people going through university, 20,000 people going on to preach the gospel. All this happened because Hattie Mae Wyatt invested her 57 cents. She gave her 57 cents to God. Her 5 loaves, her 2 fishes. This theme of God taking what little we have and multiplying it runs throughout the Bible. What we cannot achieve by addition, God achieves by multiplication. What you give the Lord, He will use for His glory. The hungry needed food that day, and Jesus met the need. When you need a miracle, number one, admit you need a miracle. Admit you can't fix this on your own. You can't do this. Humble yourself and say, God, I need you. Look at what you already have in your possession. Give it to God and watch Him do the miraculous with it. Lord, I thank you that you have so faithfully given us the Holy Spirit who shows us and illuminates so much of your word. Thank you, Lord, for reminding us that we need you, that we need the miracles that you still do today. Lord, help us understand that we need you. And Lord, help us give you what we have so that you can multiply it many times over. Isn't it wonderful to know that God is able to meet our needs when we truly give to Him? 5 loaves, 2 fishes in the hands of a hungry boy fed a crowd of over 5,000 men plus women and children. That's miraculous. As we live in these days of incredible uncertainty and more uncertainty coming around the corner for all we know, rather than panic, when Jesus wants to do something, He may come to you and say, what do you have? I encourage you to give it to Him. I'm not talking about taking a church offering. This has nothing to do with money. It's just what you have, give to Him. Do you need a miracle? Well, I know that God still does miracles today. Thank you, and God bless you, and have a really good day and week.
I can see the waters raging at my feet. I can feel the breath of those surrounding me. I can hear the sound of nations rising up. We will not be overtaken, we will not be overcome. I can walk down this dark and painful road. I can face every fear of the unknown. I can feel all God's children singing out. We will not be overtaken, we will not be overcome. The same power that rose Jesus from the grave, the same power that commands the dead to wake, lives in us, lives in us. The same power that moves mountains when He speaks, the same power that can calm a dangerous sea, lives in us, lives in us, lives in us, lives in us. We have hope that His promises are true in His strength. There is nothing we can't do. Yes, we know there are greater things in store. We will not be overtaken, we will not be overcome. The same power that rose Jesus from the grave, the same power that commands the dead to wake, lives in us, lives in us. The same power that moves mountains when He speaks, the same power that can calm a raging sea, lives in us, lives in us, lives in us, lives in us. Greater is He who is living in me. He's conquered our enemy. No power of darkness, no weapon prevails. We stand here in victory. Greater is He who is living in me. He's conquered our enemy. No power of darkness, no weapon prevails. We stand here in victory. Oh, in victory. Yeah. The same power that rose Jesus from the grave, the same power that commands the dead to wake, lives in us, lives in us. The same power that moves mountains, He moves mountains when He speaks, that can calm a raging sea, lives in us, lives in us. He lives in us, lives in us. He lives in us, lives in us. He lives in us, lives in us.